The dazzling blue electric energy rays tore through the sky. The atmosphere became more tense than ever. Mark and Maria looked up, horrified at the scene unfolding. Meanwhile, the protesters remained silent. No one dared to move before that terrible force. A cold voice rang out in the silence. All right, come in if you want. Then a voice like thunder, full of menace. But if you do that, you will die. Instantly, blue electric energy exploded around Neid, engulfing his entire body. Blue eyes glowed, Neid's face filled with anger. And then the green electric energy was released, destroying everything in its path. From afar, Amira exclaimed in surprise. What? Amira roared angrily. Neid, we have favored you because you have done so well. And this is how you talk to your seniors? Instantly, Neid released a blinding blue electric energy that enveloped him. Lightning flashed. Neid said coldly, do I need to repeat myself? The other students exclaimed in surprise. Wait, no way. That's... Amira was in utter panic. It can't be. Amira stuttered. It's plasma magic. Amy's eyes widened, not believing what was happening. Isn't he just a 5th grader? Even in our school, only Raken, a 1st grader, can use it. Amy was getting more and more terrified. That's genuine death magic. Siriel gritted her teeth and shouted, he hid magic like this? Iruki silently looked from the corner of the room. You bastard. Are you using that magic? Neid gritted his teeth, veins popping out on his forehead. He shouted loudly, even though I know what will happen if I do that. Qua. A blinding blue electricity exploded violently around Neid. He gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with fire. Shirone is not dead yet. I will kill every bastard who dares to touch Shirone. Neid continued to increase his magical power to its peak. Meanwhile, a voice echoed through the air. I will return. A purple beam of light shot out, piercing through the darkness, illuminating the image of the bed where Shirone was lying. Go back to where everyone is. In the infinite space, Shirone's spirit fields were like specks of blood and fire, rushing at super light speed. A strange feeling invaded, Shirone muttered. Something is clinging to me. He felt red spots of light surrounding him. Consume. Multiply. Consume. The strange sounds echoed, penetrating the mind. A strange voice echoed in Shirone's head. He exclaimed in panic, what's going on? Ah, Reincarnation. The lowest existence. Are mortals always so determined to live? The image before Shirone's eyes blurred, and he suddenly realized, so this is it. In a solemn room, the goddess spoke softly, it is not easy for a pure and sacred entity to return to a complex physical body, let alone a human body filled with disgusting elements. The goddess's words kept ringing in Shirone's ears. No, I'll be back, Shirone screamed. Back? Back to where? You are not welcome anywhere. The only thing waiting for you is death. Immediately, Shirone angrily shouted, shut up. I will return to my world, Shirone struggled in despair. Let me go. A blinding light engulfed everything. Rumble, asterisk. Neid West stood in the midst of the ruins, blue electric energy surrounding him. Around him were panicking civilians. Amira frowned and said, why do you refuse to accept your friend's death, you idiot? Neid's lightning bolts continued to radiate deadly energy. Boom, boom, asterisk. Neid stood in midair, surrounded by a hazy mist. He gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing as he stared at the other party. Amira began to cast her magic. This is weather magic that has the ability to absorb. Screams echoed. Amira and the others appeared, their eyes filled with anger and resentment. Neid, do you really think you can face all of us alone? Neid did not reply. Blue electric energy began to explode around him. Boom, the ground shook violently. Everyone was about to charge at each other without mercy. Suddenly there were footsteps and a familiar voice. Tsk, tsk. I can't believe you pushed yourself into a fight you can't control. Iruki was standing right behind Neid, his face full of confidence as he said, should I help you? Neid turned around in surprise but still maintained his crazy magic. Iruki! Neid gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing. You thought Shirone was dead, Neid roared angrily. Aren't you on their side? Neid roared at Iruki, to the surprise of the students on the opposite side. Iruki stood up straight, a slightly confused look on his face. Huh? Of course not. I just didn't want to let them do whatever they wanted, and then take Shirone away. Immediately, a crimson energy burst out. Amira roared angrily, you brats! Meanwhile, Shirone was still lying motionless, deep in sleep. Looks like this is the end. Outside, Amy asked Alpius in surprise. What are you talking about? What do you mean by the end? She continued to question. You mean you're going to bury Shirone? Is that what you mean? In another corner, Sienna said to Atella, Amy, look outside. The two looked out the window. Alpius continued, those kids have released deadly magic and are trying to kill each other. Amy, with red eyes filled with worry, looked at Alpius and said, if things continue like this, it will lead to another tragedy. She grabbed old man Alpius' hand. Her voice choked. No, it can't be. Shirone isn't dead. You know that, right? Tears rolled down Amy's cheeks. She whispered, Shirone. Meanwhile, Fermi laughed loudly with delight. He. He clenched his fists, his face filled with excitement. Fight. Feel the fear. Neid, with light green hair, glared at Fermi. Blue electric energy surrounded him as he gritted his teeth and said, I will be the one to find you. Amira stood silently, her magical blue eyes looking into the distance. She muttered, is this real? Classmates are using deadly magic against each other. Then Amira looked forward, her eyes flashing with recognition. You are Eruki, the one with savant syndrome. Eruki stood before the crowd, his face full of confidence. Amira raised her voice. You, who always uses cold logic more than anyone else, make such emotional judgments? Amira continued, her gaze directed towards Eruki. Do you really believe that Shirone is still alive? Immediately, Eruki firmly asserted, I have only one answer for that. His voice echoed through the space. Shirone is not dead. Hearing that, Neid's eyes widened, and he exclaimed in surprise, what? Amira burst out laughing. Ha! Her eyes flashed with blue electricity, looking towards Eruki with a challenging look. Is that so? She gritted her teeth and continued, I'm sure you've prepared a perfect, logical explanation to convince us, right? Eruki smiled confidently. Of course. Suddenly, Eruki calmly stood before everyone's attention. The entire group of students fell silent, waiting for Eruki's answer. He declared, I have proof. Amira stood before Eruki, her red eyes blazing with anger. She growled, then show us. What makes you think Shirone is still alive? Eruki smiled smugly, raising his hand high. The reason, first, it's 4 o'clock now. Well, I'll let you see for yourself. Swoosh! Eruki snapped his fingers. Immediately, a loud sound rang out through the crowd. Ding dong! That confidence startled the students, their expressions tense. The bell? One student said in horror, it's like that supernatural show back then. Tai Yong. What's going on? Neid glanced at Eruki skeptically. He's counting, but what's going on? Amira suddenly realized something. She opened her eyes wide and looked straight ahead. I understand. Now I understand. Amira screamed, a red flame bursting around her. You guys are all crazy. No matter what, we will confirm Shirone's condition ourselves. Amira gritted her teeth, clenching her fists. Canis appeared next to Eruki. Eruki had a sly smile on his face, holding an envelope in his hand. Amira threatened, how long do you think you can hold out before the class graduates? Canis winked at Eruki standing next to him. Oh, this looks pretty fun. Suddenly, Amira, from in front, her red eyes blazing with anger, shouted loudly, you guys, she gritted her teeth, you guys dare to come here without any fear. Standing in front of Amira, Canis, Eruki, and Arian remained calm. Amira gritted her teeth and said, this time I will definitely catch you. Remember my words. Canis smirked confidently and replied, if you can do it. Then Eruki looked down at the file and said, we're late. Canis asked, puzzled, what? You told me to come at 4 o'clock? Eruki glanced at his watch and said coldly, you're 27 seconds late. Canis clicked his tongue. Anyway, I've already paid off my debt to Shirone. Neid still asked in shock, Eruki, what is it? Eruki handed Neid a piece of paper from Dragonbolt. Neid widened his eyes and stammered, what? Then Eruki looked down, remembering what he had done. Eruki had performed a biopsy on Shirone and sent the collected samples. Neid frowned, muttering, when did you do this? No, more importantly, you did this 5 days from the capital? Meanwhile, beside him, Canis tilted his head, smirked, and looked completely clueless. Dr. Dragonbolt? Aaron stood beside Canis with a blank expression, skeptical about the information. Amira was standing in front of a large building. She angrily shouted, what kind of farce is this? Do you think bringing up Mercadene's name will change anything? Eruki stood next to Neid and calmly replied, don't worry, I used an alias. If I used my real name, my father would only be in trouble. Eruki continued, rather, don't you think what's written in this document is more important? Amira glared at Eruki, gritting her teeth. So what? Does it contain a spell that can revive a person from the dead or something? Eruki looked at the text and read, it's titled, Analysis of the Function of Immortality and the State of Suspension of Bodily Functions. Based on analysis of the subject's cellular structure, they are in a state of suspended animation. Within the range of samples collected 24 hours after the subject's death, no changes characteristic of organic organisms were found. The data is as follows. Judging by the recorded data, the subject can be considered to be in a state where bodily functions are suspended, but it cannot be concluded that bodily functions have ceased. The student standing behind Amira asked worriedly, So what's the difference? Does that mean he's not dead? Amira, with red eyes and an angry expression, continued to listen to the information from the file. Dragonbolt said there are 3 types of cardiac arrest. One is the heart stops working completely. Second, the heart temporarily stops working. And third, the heart does not stop working, but is in a state where it appears to have stopped. Amira's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she just heard. She shouted, "Wait, the third type is absurd." Clack! Iruki slammed the documents down. This is important. Listen carefully. In the dimly lit room, Iruki stood before a floating heart, surrounded by veins winding like tree roots. He muttered, "Although a creature whose heart stops can be considered dead, but considering the immortal function, there might be 2 new cases." Then the scene shifted to a large building where a crowd of students were gathered. Iruki continued, "Case 1, until the mind comes to a conclusion." Next, Iruki held a pocket watch in his hand, his expression serious. In the case that the expansion of the will is delayed due to uniqueness, there is a chance that the observer's perception of time may differ. In case 2, Araki continued, even if the subject's will expansion has ended, if a subject whose body will temporarily ceases bodily functions voluntarily. At that moment, in another corner, Amy was holding Siriel's hand tightly, her face filled with worry. Amy said, her voice trembling, "Like this, while the body is functioning normally." The entire school was still listening to Aruki's every word. It may be impossible for an outsider to observe this activity due to a space-time barrier. Aruki was looking through some documents. Based on the findings of active magic, the subject, he paused for a moment, then said, anyway. Meanwhile, Amira, with a look of utter surprise on her face, was still attentively listening to every piece of information from the document that Aruki was reading. And finally, Araki concluded, lying in the infirmary, Arian Shirone cannot be pronounced dead. On the ivory white paper, there is a red stamp with the image of a dragon and engraved words. An analysis of immortality, function, and suspension of bodily function. "How is it?" Neid asked, his blue eyes filled with tears, a glimmer of hope. Iruki smiled smugly and replied, "I found it, a way to revive the dead."